Welcome back to the podcast, guys. Episode 11 today, and we're going to be talking about AgTech and why so many people are investing in agriculture, both in AgTech and in ag lands. And I think it's really interesting to look at the rush by so many. I mean, if you watch the news or you're reading the news, you're going to see reports in the Wall Street Journal about some of the largest landowners in the United States being some of the most wealthy people. Jeff Bezos is on that list as being number one or number two. Elon Musk, Bill Gates. These guys are taking their investments from their traditional tech sector, software and whatnot, and they're moving that into agriculture. And some of that investment is in traditional agriculture. Some of it is in ag tech. And in today's guest, we've got Creg Fielding. Creg is with us from, Fusionware, we want to call it that?
Fusionware, yes.
Okay, so Craig's with us from Fusionware. It's a software actually that we use in our operation to help, in the entire process actually, from our shipping to our inventory management to our traceability. But he's involved heavily in the ag tech sector, and his insight is interesting and valuable. And it's interesting for me it will be interesting to have you guys along as we have this conversation, as we talk about what's happening and why he thinks it's happening. I can speak to why I think folks are investing in ag lands, but why folks are deciding that investing in ag tech is a different question. So Creg, you want to introduce yourself and then maybe start with that. Why do you think people are investing in ag tech?
Yeah, first of all, privileged to be here today. Appreciate Shay giving me this opportunity to relay some thoughts. I think this is going to be a fun conversation here today. My background, been in software technologies for the past 30 plus years, been in financial technologies, been in pharmaceuticals, actually been in some mobile technologies. And in late 2013, 2014, kind of got sucked into this ag space and back in because grew up on a farm. Family still owns some farmland, and I thought, man, I could take a year's worth of this experience. As I got further into this, I saw that there was a lot of opportunity, candidly, within this space to apply technology.
Is that partially because ag is slower to adopt a lot of things?
Very much slow. I've got so many stories, Shay, that we could have some fun times talking about some of the offices that we walked into.
And since you do that, why do you think that's the case? Why the hesitation among farmers or people in agriculture to adopt the technology? Is there like a common thread, anything that you see?
So yeah, there is a very common thread. So what we're seeing is the generational. So what we see is the old generation has been very slow to adopt software and technology. And for them, it's really this physical. One thing that we always laugh about in our office is it's not hard for a farmer to go out and spend a significant amount of money on items and equipment that they can physically touch and grab.
Yeah. No,
when it comes to software, I mean, I
agree with you. No, I can totally relate because like the idea of when we were starting, like anymore, our monthly, subscription rate on what we pay for software is, to me, astoundingly high.
Yes.
And it's completely intangible, right? And so if you put a packing line on your production floor or you buy a tractor or a truck, you get to use it and you physically can see what the result is. And when it comes to software, there are actually some results that you can physically see in labor savings and in some efficiencies and stuff like that, but it's not at all the same. And so, yeah, it's different.
It is different, but we have this generational divide now. So you have this generation that we're finding is this generation of farmers that are now starting to either sell their farms or sell their operations to this next generation coming in. And it's quite, it's serious because these kids are coming a lot of times from other companies that technology and software is very advanced. I mean, highly advanced into operations that are running a lot of times still on paper, spreadsheets, and an assorted mix of technology that requires multiple data input through the entire supply chain.
I think the other piece of that too is what we do in agriculture that makes, trying to implement software harder is if I run a factory. So from a packing shed standpoint, what we do in production on a daily basis is pretty straightforward. Like we put this many pounds in and we get this many pounds out. So we can measure the shrink. We can measure what line A, B, and C, and D are producing. But when it comes to the production, like the growing side of agriculture, that doesn't work. We can't just count the number of seeds that we put in the ground. and then calculate what our yield's going to be, because there's so many factors that Mother Nature impacts. Like you got wind and rain and drought and pest pressure. You've got all of these things that come into play. So you can't just take data point A and subtract data point B and get, your answer as C. And so it makes the ability to track all of that information, it makes it more important, but it also makes it like less accurate. And it's less accurate because of the outside impacts that you wouldn't have in a strictly production setting. Does that make sense? I think to me that makes it.
It makes total sense. I think that, and maybe we're getting a little ahead in our conversation, but I think while we're talking about that, I think that's key, because how many different systems are you using today through that supply chain? And I'm sure there's several different tools that you're using today to be able to do all of that tracking and identification, right, to try and see what those yields are.
Right. When we gather so much data, and so, they talk about this all the time. Like, okay, you're gathering all this data and it's going to be worth something. If you could look back retroactively, right, or retrospectively, I think of like what they did in Iraq. This is a bit of a tangent, but it'll make sense here in a second. Mm-hmm. When they were running those drones constantly over Baghdad, mm-hmm, and then when there was a bombing, they would track that bomb that was set off until they found the person, walked to the field, and then they'd run that film in reverse all the way until they found out where that person came from. Right. So it was almost like being able to time travel. Yep. And I think that's where we are in agriculture with all these different variables. We're collecting the data, but we still haven't learned how to really use it. Like at some point we need to gather it and then extract the value that's there. Like, for example, this year we have, comparatively, for some reason, we have a very, very high quality onion crop versus a lot of our neighbors. That's not always the case. In fact, it's generally not the case. Usually if our neighbors have problems, we have problems. We did something this year. We don't know what it is. And we've talked about it over and over. It's going to save us lots of money and help us have a lot of happy customers, but we have no idea what we did that's different.
And see, it's in the data.
It'd be there.
It's in the data.
It's there somewhere.
Yeah.
Okay. So if we talk about AgTech, there's all of these things developing, happening. What's the most disruptive thing that you see happening in the next 5 years or less?
And that's a tough question, because there's so much investment. There's a lot of things happening in AgTech. And so I think a lot of the most disruptive is, I think that as you look out in the investment and what's happened over the last 4 years. I mean, let's talk about that, and maybe that will roll to my final answer. And that is, just in the last since 2017, we've seen 300-400% increase in investment in AgTech. So 600 plus new AgTech companies are popping up every year worldwide. Obviously, that's not sustainable. So we're starting to see some of this start to roll up. And as more and more of that investment dollars happen, I think one of the most disruptive pieces of this is information and data collection. Because now we've got all these different systems. We have drones. We have robots
satellites
out in the field. I mean, we have all these different systems that are collecting all of this data. But as you see, we're not actually utilizing and analyzing.
In a lot of cases, we're not utilizing it. Most of the time, I would say.
And that's where I think one of the more disruptive pieces of this will be, is when we actually can have a centralized system or the ability to utilize that data to where we can get real information and real answers from that data. Right. I don't think we're getting real answers, because everything's an island. We have all these data. We have all these data islands through the entire supply chain, which kind of lends to some of these other questions we're going to get into. Because there's all these data islands, we've got to bring that together.
Right. And before we started recording, you talked about the vertical farming. So actually, this makes me think of that, because that is another advantage of the indoor farming trend. Yeah, the ability that it's a closed, so you still have variables that come into play, but you control the light through lighting. You know what your lighting is. You control the water within, orders of magnitude less variability, with orders of magnitude less variability than what we do outdoors. I don't know what other things would come into play, but
it's literally a closed loop.
Exactly. So the data you do collect,
it's all in one place, and including all the way to a closed loop. We're working with and involved with companies that are actually doing. They're raising fish and then using the fertilizer off the fish to actually fertilize the plants in the vertical farming. It's a fully closed loop. Plus, so you got the protein side on the fish and utilizing the fertilizer and then reuse of the water.
Yeah.
I mean, in urban areas, that is going to revolutionize.
Yeah. I'm not I don't want to say an opponent to it. I'm very skeptical of the ability to truly execute. And I look at it, it's kind of okay, so we're doing a lot of this for, to save food miles, for example.
Yes.
There is higher yield. I really want to see the white papers that someday that do the comparison of what the real savings are. Because when you look at electricity use and like which is better, ultimately, strictly from a carbon footprint, from an emission standpoint and energy usage, which is more efficient? Because when we're using that natural light, I think it's better. However, leafy greens and these crops that you can grow in 60, 90 days are totally different than something like an onion that takes 200 days to grow. Like
your weight.
And the weight.
Yeah.
There's so we can, and what Craig's referring to there is when we ship a truck across the country, if it's leafy greens, you're going to put 20,000 pounds, maybe. I don't even know what I should, sorry, leafy greens guys who are listening here who know how many pounds you get on, but you're going to cube out the truck, meaning you're going to fill the truck out by volume long before you fill it out based on from a weight standpoint. And onions and high density things like onions and potatoes and carrots and things like that, you're going to maximize on a per pound basis that space on that truck and its ability to ship. So our cost per pound is dramatically lower because of that.
Agreed. So from a disruptive standpoint, I mean, we're seeing there's several things. That's why I was going to say that's a hard one to answer, because there's multitude of investments that are coming into the marketplace right now that are going to be highly disruptive over the next few years.
Okay, so then most impactful or problematic. I'll let you kind of combine those two if you want.
Problematic. I think, we've seen it, with some of the food safety traceability. Back to our data island problem. The food safety traceability issue is a major issue, and there's been significant investment in that. In fact,
it's not for people not trying. It's just
exactly
the system.
I mean, it's the second most invested in item as far as vertical over the last 4 years, and yet it still hasn't been solved 100% because there's still a data islands around this supply chain. And in order to get that to work, we really need to go to some centralized reporting solution of some kind, or get everybody to talk to one another in some way and be able to exchange and hand on this information. That's a huge problem.
That's a huge one.
And it's going to be a hard one to get everybody to.
Yeah, and you've got information that people don't want to share. We just had that conversation yesterday
Yep.
We have a customer supplying product for us, and they're like, well, we don't want you to know the farm that it comes from, because they're worried about, you can go around them and you can take that customer or something, but we're not, I don't want that information to, go directly to this farmer in this case. I want the information because I need it for traceability. And these silos of information are problematic, and it's much more complicated than it seems like from the outside. The process of receiving, an order in, like, let's say, is just as a distributor, not as a farmer, it's not as near as complicated because it's all our stuff, we grow it here. But if we cross dock something comes in and we're just moving it in and out, we know where it came in from, but we don't necessarily know where that person who shipped it to us, where that came from. And they may or may not have that information. Even if they do have that information, there could easily be 1 or 2 or 3 more steps. Like, I'm sure you've seen, and trying to do your trace back, have you seen what's the most layers between final destination and starting point that you've seen?
Well, just even within our own solution, we've seen one order exchange hands 4 different times.
Yeah.
That's just within our own ecosystem.
Right.
I mean, you extend that outside of course, there's no way we're going to be able to own the entire ecosystem,
right?
But you extend that outside of our ecosystem. Yeah, it could be 5-6 times. I've talked to brokers down in California that it's unbelievable how many times that product is brokered or touched coming from an international location.
Right. Well, especially from international location, especially on like specialty items for which you're not moving full truckloads, right? Because they have to be received in and distributed in the volumes they need, especially when you start getting down to like case lot volumes or something. It would just be insanely challenging.
Right. It becomes a really hard problem to solve. And the only way that that's going to actually happen is if you get some intermediate that everybody is willing to talk to. And I think even when you have that, that's still going to be a hard challenge to overcome.
Yeah, it's almost like it would have to be a federal mandate to do something like that, like a central location where you share, you know, this PO shipped to this location and this is the source or something like that. You know, I'm not a skeptic of food safety. Food safety is important. It's also very frustrating, the entire process. And this is part of it. Like the common and costly, extremely costly. And it's very common sense, but it gets very complicated. I mean, it's pretty easy to know that product X produce, those carrots came from that farm.
Right.
But by the time you run them through those layers, it gets overly complicated very, very quickly.
Agreed.
So for this audience right now, what do you want them to know? Like, what's some insider trade here that you could, you know, help them make something that, you know, like, and I don't mean about where to invest or something like that, but I mean about what's developing in the marketplace that is impactful, meaningful, and going back to disruptive, like some, you know, like I guess I'll talk about myself for a second. A lot of people were like, a year ago, we started talking about the inflation numbers, like what we were seeing come in from inflation and what our packaging was doing. And people are like, Shay, you're exaggerating. Like, you're totally exaggerating. Like, there's no way our food is going to cost us 30% more. There's no way. And it's not like I'm not more knowledgeable than other people. I just happen to be in a position in the supply chain where what I see and experience is I see and experience before anyone else, 12 to 18 months before anyone else. So now that that's actually developing and you're seeing those inflation numbers, people are coming back and like, well, how did you know that? You've got to have things like that you see, that you're participating in, that might be, you know, give someone an advantage in understanding where the market's going or what things are happening, where tech is going, et cetera.
So, and I want to talk to that just briefly, because as we've gone into 2022 and looking at some of the headwinds that everybody is facing, there's significant headwinds in the fact that as I've interviewed our customers going into 2022, I'm hearing 25 to 30% increase in just basic input costs. I'm talking fertilizer, labor costs, just those 2 points alone. Outside of packaging and everything else that goes into actually producing any type of finished good here in the produce supply chain, it's significant. And so as far as insight, my insight would be any type of an investment that would mitigate or help those costs is going to be a very positive investment.
So we can pre-purchase. I mean, that's one thing you can do as a grower, but I mean, what's the everyday person do? I'm not trying to put you on the spot. I'm asking for myself. So forget about everybody that's like listening here, but where do we, you know, we talked about yesterday, we had a meeting. So we talked about, cryptocurrencies as an example.
Agreed.
Is it, you know, we look at the real estate market, you look at all these other things. I just wonder sometimes, like, for someone who just wants to protect a nest egg, I'm not talking millions of dollars investment, but you want to have like the old, asset that you'd go to, I would say silver or gold, right? So if you're worried about things imploding, you want to hold some, like, just, you know, something physical. Yeah. So that's there. Is there something, I mean, is crypto the new gold, or is there something else out there that you would?
We're getting completely off topic on this, but I would love to talk a little bit about that. But I think that crypto is still the wild, wild west, as we've seen huge major fluctuations with that. I think that crypto, blockchain in general, we haven't talked at any depth about blockchain as it relates to ag. And I believe that there's going to be some technologies emerging around that, including exchanging smart contracts with blockchain and other elements, including all the way getting to the point where you're getting paid for these loads in some form of crypto.
Right.
But as we go forward, I think that crypto is going to become much more valid once it is actually backed by something physical. And I'm hearing that more and more, is that there are going to be cryptos that emerge. What those are, I've got my own opinions. I don't want to get involved here, but
we'll get deep in that.
I personally believe that there are going to be 7 or 8 major cryptos out there that are backed by gold and silver and other metals, palladium and others. Interesting. So, because to me, that's like part of this, not necessarily ag tech, but tech in general. Yep.
I really feel like, my depth of understanding is nowhere on crypto, right? But it seems like there's some value there. That's a new technology that's developing that is going to be very disruptive, very impactful, and in some ways very problematic. because of what it's going to mean and the traditional way that we do things. And I don't know, as I look forward into the future, I guess I'm putting my head down and trying to use what Dan Collins calls the hedgehog method. Like, just put my head down and just try and keep focused as narrowly and as effectively on what's at hand, so that we're here in 5 years. Because that's the other piece of this too. All of this technology, all of what's going on currently in the economy is just the difficulty. And by adding additional volatility, the difficulty that we are going to face and just doing business as usual. Business as usual is not going to be there anymore.
Agreed.
And the tech side is going to be that much more critical, because you have to have those numbers. Like, if we were off by 2 or 3% in the past on what our cost of production was, okay, it was problematic. But we weren't going to be, if we were off by 3% and our cost was only up 4%, where there's a 1% variation. But if now we're off by that same percentage, we could be off by 25%, and that total dollar amount is enough to put somebody out of business in a pretty quick hurry. So that all the information that could be gathered is going to be that much more important.
Agreed.
Well, Craig, thank you for being on with us. Sorry, thanks for going on the tangent with me too here for a second.
No problem. Yeah, I did. Don't get me started on crypto. Like I say, we could do another podcast.
Yeah, a whole nother podcast just on crypto. That'd be good, because I'd learn something, because I think it's cool. I can see the value maybe, but I admittedly don't understand really much about it.
And then you start talking NFTs, and that's a whole other space.
Now that one I don't understand at all. Yeah. So yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks guys for being here. If you have any questions, Craig, where do they find you? Is there a place they can find you?
Yeah, absolutely. Just go to fusionware.com and you can find out. There's some great videos out there to learn more about Fusionware, or on LinkedIn, either one.
You're on LinkedIn? Okay.
Yeah.
So go check him out there if you want some insight on what's happening in AgTech. And I can tell you that is it. I get a lot of phone calls, inquiries, and people asking about agriculture and AgTech all of the time. And that has dramatically changed over the course of the last 5 years. It's that much more in the last 3 years. And it's something people are concerned about it. And that's part of the reason that these podcasts and the YouTube channel and all of these things have reach, is because of that interest by the general public in agriculture. So if you've liked what you heard today, you'd like to keep learning more, come like and subscribe. Any commentary that you can throw on there is also beneficial. And I like to hear from you, so that I know what kind of content you'd like to see, what you'd like to hear. And I'll catch you next time. We'll see you.